The American West is on the verge of a catastrophic water failure affecting 40 million people. Its two largest reservoirs, the lifeblood of 7 states and northern Mexico, are now so low they are approaching what is known as dead pool. The images are a stark warning. A white mineral scar, a bathtub ring hundreds of feet high, traces the water line on the canyon walls of Lake Mead and Lake Powell, a ghost of a river that no longer exists. The scale of the loss is almost incomprehensible. The deficit in the system now totals more than 20 trillion gallons of water. That is enough to cover the entire state of Florida in a foot of water, and it is gone. The federal government has now threatened to take control from the states for the first time in a century, forcing unprecedented cuts on cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Los Angeles, and on the farms that grow 90% of America's winter vegetables. The river that carved the Grand Canyon and made the desert bloom is now a symbol of a promise that has been broken. But here's the detail that tells the real story. The entire crisis was written into law 100 years ago. The Colorado River Compact of 1922, the foundational document that governs every drop of water in the basin, was built on a catastrophic lie. The 7 states that gathered to divide the river's flow based their calculations on data from one of the wettest periods in the last 1,200 years. They allocated 17.5 million acre-feet of water per year to themselves and to Mexico. The problem is the river's long-term average flow is closer to 13.5 million acre-feet. They promised more water than the river has ever consistently been able to give. It was a system designed for failure from its first day. Every gallon drawn since, every farm planted, every city built, has been based on this original sin, a fatal overestimation that has now met the reality of a 23-year mega-drought and a warming climate. And for decades, the authorities in charge of this system knew it. They watched the reservoirs deplete, they saw the climate models, and they did nothing to fix the fundamental math. This is how it happened. The current decline began in the year 2000. It did not seem like a crisis at first, just a dry year, then another. But the dry years kept coming. By 2007, with Lake Mead dropping precipitously, the 7 basin states signed a set of interim guidelines. It was the first admission that the system was in trouble. The guidelines established tiered cutbacks tied to the elevation of Lake Mead. A Tier 1 shortage would be declared if the lake dropped below 1,075 feet above sea level, Tier 2 at 1,050 feet, Tier 3 at 1,025 feet. It was meant to be a controlled descent, a way to manage the problem. It felt responsible. It felt proactive. But it was just a blueprint for a slow-motion collapse. The guidelines assumed the drought would eventually break. They were built on the same optimism that infected the 1922 Compact, the belief that the rain would always return. It did not. For 12 more years, the system bled water. Downstream states continued to draw their full allocations while upstream states held back water in Lake Powell, trying to keep its levels high enough to generate hydropower at the Glen Canyon Dam. The imbalance grew. According to the structural deficit, the gap between what was promised and what nature provided widened from a crack into a chasm. In 2019, the situation became so dire that a new agreement was needed, the Drought Contingency Plan. This was supposed to be the real fix. It required states like Arizona, Nevada, and California to take proactive, voluntary cuts even before a federal shortage was declared. It was hailed as a landmark achievement in cooperation, but it was a finger in a dike that was already crumbling. The plan's projections were obsolete the moment they were signed. They failed to account for the accelerating pace of climate change. And here is what made it so much worse. The years 2020 and 2021 delivered the 2 driest consecutive years in the basin's recorded history. The spring runoff from the Rocky Mountain snowpack, as the primary source of the river's water, was catastrophically low. The soil, baked dry by years of drought, soaked up the meltwater like a sponge before it could ever reach the river. The reservoirs began to plummet not by inches, but by feet, every single week. In the summer of 2021, Lake Mead fell below 1,075 feet for the first time ever, triggering the first official Tier 1 shortage declaration. Arizona lost nearly 20% of its supply overnight. Nevada lost 7%, but California, the river's largest user, lost nothing. Its senior water rights insulated it from the first round of cuts. The system was now punishing those who lived in the desert first. Then came 2022. The levels at Lake Powell, the nation's second-largest reservoir, fell so low that they threatened the turbines of the Glen Canyon Dam. Now, if Powell dropped below 3,490 feet, it would reach minimum power pool. The dam would no longer be able to generate electricity for 6 million people. To stop this, the Bureau of Reclamation took an unprecedented step. It held back nearly 500,000 acre-feet of water that was legally obligated to go downstream to Lake Mead. It was a desperate act of triage, sacrificing one reservoir to save another, and it ordered an additional 500,000 acre-feet to be released from reservoirs upstream, like Flaming Gorge, draining smaller systems to prop up the failing giant. Even with these emergency measures, Lake Mead continued its freefall. By June of 2022, it was approaching 1,040 feet, just 15 feet above the trigger for a Tier 3 shortage, a level a decade of projections had said would not be reached until 2025 at the earliest. The system was accelerating towards total failure, and that is when the federal government finally lost its patience. On June 14, 2022, Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Kalimlim-Touton appeared before a Senate committee and delivered an ultimatum that sent shockwaves across the West. She gave the 7 states just 60 days to develop a plan to cut their water use by an additional 2 to 4 million acre-feet. 2 to 4 million. That is up to a third of the river's entire annual flow. It was an amount so staggering, so far beyond anything ever contemplated, that it was seen as impossible. And she made the threat explicit. If the states could not agree on a plan by the mid-August deadline, the federal government would impose the cuts itself. For the first time in 100 years, the states were about to lose control of the river. Here's what was happening on the ground. In Pinal County, Arizona, halfway between Phoenix and Tucson, the federal ultimatum was not a threat. It was a death sentence that had already been carried out. Farmers there rely almost entirely on water delivered by the Central Arizona Project, a 336-mile-long canal that carries Colorado River water across the desert. Because of their junior water rights, they were the very first to be cut off when the Tier 1 shortage was declared. Dan Thelander is a third-generation farmer in Pinal County. His family has been working that land for over 70 years, growing cotton, alfalfa, and grain. In 2022, he had to fallow half of his 6,000 acres. He let half of the land he had spent his life cultivating turn back to dust. The canals that fed his fields were bone dry. His equipment sat idle. His revenue was cut in half. He had to lay off workers whose families had worked for his family for decades. This was not a matter of installing drip irrigation or planting less thirsty crops. He had no water, zero. He was forced to watch his fields just miles away. Those with senior rights or access to groundwater continued to irrigate. The system was not just failing, it was creating winners and losers in real time, sacrificing one community to save another. Thelander described it as an economic disaster unfolding in slow motion. Hundreds of thousands of acres of the most productive farmland in Arizona are now slated to go out of production permanently. The regional economy, built entirely on agriculture, is facing complete collapse. It is a preview of what happens when a water supply you have built your entire life on simply vanishes. Contrast this with the view from Las Vegas. The city gets 90% of its water from Lake Mead, yet it has become a global model for urban water conservation. It has reduced its total water consumption by nearly 30% since 2002, while its population has grown by more than 750,000 people. It has implemented one of the most aggressive and successful cash-for-grass programs in the world, paying homeowners and businesses to tear out their lawns and replace them with desert landscaping. It recycles 100% of its indoor water, treating it and returning it to Lake Mead. But even that is not enough. The Southern Nevada Water Authority has spent nearly $1.5 billion on infrastructure to prepare for the worst. It built a third straw, a low-level intake pipe drilled deep into the bottom of Lake Mead, completed in 2015. It was an engineering marvel designed to keep pulling water even if the lake fell below the 2 older intakes. In April 2022, that future arrived. The lake level dropped so low that the uppermost intake number 1, built in 1971, emerged from the water for the first time. It is now a useless concrete cylinder high on a dry, bleached slope. The city now relies entirely on its deeper intakes. The third straw is no longer a failsafe. It is the primary artery. And the cost of that water is rising, passed on to residents and businesses, a constant reminder that life in the desert is a privilege, not a right. The psychological toll is immense. Residents watch the lake level on the evening news like a stock market ticker, knowing that their city's fate is tied to a number that only ever seems to go down. This crisis has exposed the deep-seated conflict that has always defined the West: agriculture versus the cities. Farming uses roughly 80% of the Colorado River's water. A single alfalfa farm in the Imperial Valley of California can use more water in a year than a small city. As the pressure mounts, urban centers look at those farms and ask why they should be forced to let their parks die while farmers grow thirsty crops like alfalfa, much of which is exported to feed cattle in other countries. But the farmers have the senior water rights, laws written in the 19th century based on the principle of first in time, first in right. The Imperial Irrigation District in California holds rights to over 3 million acre-feet of water, more than Arizona and Nevada combined. They have some of the most senior rights on the entire river, but they are, by law, the last in line to be cut. This legal reality has created a political stalemate. How can you ask a city like Phoenix to survive on a fraction of its water while a farmer next door continues to flood a field of alfalfa because of a law written when Ulysses S. Grant was president? The answer is, you cannot. Not without tearing up a century of law, contracts, and treaties. And that is a battle no one has been willing to fight, until now. To understand the stakes, to see what happens when a water war turns a fertile region into a wasteland, look at the Owens Valley. In the early 1900s, the city of Los Angeles was growing rapidly and running out of water. Its leaders, under the direction of a man named William Mulholland, looked 200 miles north to the Owens Valley. It was a pastoral landscape of farms and ranches fed by the snowmelt of the Sierra Nevada. Operating in secret, Los Angeles agents posed as ranchers and farmers and began buying up land and water rights from the unsuspecting residents. By the time the valley's inhabitants realized what was happening, the city owned most of the valley floor. In 1913, the Los Angeles Aqueduct was completed, a massive concrete channel that diverted the entire flow of the Owens River and sent it south to fuel the growth of the metropolis. Mulholland's speech at the opening ceremony was just 5 words. There it is, take it. The Owens Valley was destroyed. The river dried up. The once fertile farmland turned to alkali flats. Owens Lake became a vast, toxic dust bowl, the single largest source of particulate matter pollution in the United States. And it became a ghost of a valley, sacrificed for the future of a city. This is the historical precedent. This is what the communities along the Colorado River now fear, that they will become the next Owens Valley, that a decision will be made in a distant room in Washington, D.C. to sacrifice their town, their farm, their way of life, to keep the water flowing to a more politically powerful user downstream. Here is what is not making most headlines. The crisis is not just about water quantity, it is about power. The Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell and the Hoover Dam at Lake Mead are titans of the electrical grid. Together, they generate enough hydroelectric power for millions of homes and businesses across the West. That power is cheap and it is clean, but to generate it, and the water level in the reservoirs must be high enough to flow through the intake pipes to spin the turbines. This minimum level is called the minimum power pool. Lake Powell is now dangerously close to this threshold. If it drops below 3,490 feet, the Glen Canyon Dam stops producing electricity. The immediate impact would be a power crisis for the nearly 6 million people in 7 states who rely on it. Tribal nations like the Navajo Nation would be hit particularly hard. The ripple effects would be catastrophic. Utilities would have to buy power on the open market, likely from natural gas or coal plants, at a much higher cost, raising electricity bills for everyone. The grid, already strained by summer heat waves, would become less stable. It is a silent, parallel crisis. As the water disappears, so does the power. And there is another hidden threat: salinity. The Colorado River is naturally salty, picking up dissolved minerals from the rock and soil it flows through. As the river's volume shrinks, that salt becomes more and more concentrated. The water that remains is getting saltier every year. This has devastating consequences. High salinity water poisons crops, reducing agricultural yields. It corrodes municipal and industrial pipes, costing cities millions in repairs and replacement. It requires expensive desalination and treatment processes for drinking water. The economic damage from salinity is already estimated at over $300 million a year. That cost will only climb as the river dwindles. The water that is left is becoming harder and more expensive to use. We are fighting for a shrinking supply of a deteriorating resource. And then there is the forgotten end of the line: Mexico. A 1944 treaty guarantees Mexico 1.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water per year. For most of the late 20th century, the river ran so low that it barely reached the border. The once lush Colorado River Delta, a massive wetland ecosystem teeming with life that covered nearly 2 million acres, dried up and died. It became a sterile expanse of cracked mud and salt flats. In recent years, a series of experimental pulse flows negotiated between the US and Mexico have managed to bring a trickle of life back to small sections of the delta. But with the upstream crisis worsening, Mexico is now also facing cuts. It has agreed to give up a portion of its allocation as part of the cross-border conservation efforts. But the people in the Mexicali Valley, who depend on the river for their farms and their cities, are now at the mercy of decisions being made hundreds of miles away in state capitals that do not represent them. The river is a shared resource, but the pain of its collapse is not being shared equally. The ecosystem and the people at the very end of the pipe are paying the highest price for the mistakes made a century ago. The 60-day deadline set by the federal government came and went in August 2022. The states failed to produce a deal. The lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada, could not agree on how to divide the cuts. The upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, argued they were already using less water than they were entitled to, and that the problem lay downstream. The negotiations were deadlocked, paralyzed by a century of competing interests and antiquated laws. The federal government, despite its threat, blinked. It declined to impose its own solution, instead announcing a Tier 2 shortage for the coming year and kicking the can down the road, urging the states to keep talking. The inaction was a stunning anticlimax, a failure of leadership at the moment of maximum leverage. What followed was months of bitter public negotiations. Arizona and Nevada proposed a plan. California, with its senior rights, proposed a different, less painful plan for itself. The 6 other states rallied against California, accusing it of refusing to take its fair share of the pain. Finally, in the spring of 2023, facing a new federal deadline, a temporary consensus was reached. The 3 lower basin states agreed to a plan to conserve an additional 3 million acre-feet of water by the end of 2026. A significant portion of these cuts will be compensated. The federal government, through the Inflation Reduction Act, is paying farmers and water districts billions of dollars to voluntarily use less water. They are paying farmers not to farm. It is a temporary truce, not a permanent solution. It buys 3 years of time. A reprieve. It was made possible only by an unusually wet winter in 2023, which dumped a massive snowpack in the Rockies and temporarily boosted reservoir levels, taking the immediate threat of a Deadpool scenario off the table. But everyone knows one wet winter does not break a 2-decade megadrought. The bathtub rings on Lake Mead and Lake Powell are still there. The structural deficit is still there. The flawed math of the 1922 Compact is still the law of the land, and the water in the reservoirs is still critically low, far below where it was just 20 years ago. The system has no buffer. Another 2 dry years in a row could put the West right back where it was in the summer of 2022, on the brink of chaos. The current agreements all expire in 2026. Negotiations for the next set of rules, the post-2026 guidelines, are already underway, and they will be the most consequential water negotiations in American history. Everything must be on the table. The senior rights of agricultural districts, the price of water, the growth of cities, and the very existence of certain crops in the desert. The question now is not if the old system built a century ago will fail. It already has. The fundamental promise of the river has been broken, and the era of unlimited growth is over. The question is what and who will be sacrificed to build the new one. As the states draw their battle lines and the climate continues to warm, 40 million people are living on borrowed water and borrowed time. Word count, 3,584.